to the Books Applied podcast, presented by WSL Leadership. In this podcast, we talk about an awesome book and how to apply it to your work, sport, or life. I'm your host, Iggy Perillo. Thanks for joining me. Hello, and welcome to today's episode. I am talking with my thoughtful friend, Jess, and we are discussing the book, The Power of Moments, Why Certain Experiences Have Extraordinary Impact by Chip and Dan Heath. Hello, Jess. Thanks for being here with me today.
Hey, thanks, Iggy. Excited to get into the book.
Oh, yeah. I know you mentioned this book to me. I'd read this book and then you brought it back to my attention. Why did this book, I guess we're just going to jump to the end. Like, why did this book stick out for you in your mind as something interesting, useful? Yeah. What caught your eye?
That's a great question. I think for me, it was the fact that as a person, as an individual, you can create moments, defining moments for other people. And that kind of stood out, right? It's like, it kind of takes you out of the box and saying like, this world is not just about you. It's about how you can help others. And this is how you can help yourself and others as well. And so, we had kind of briefly chatted before saying the book is structured so well, and it kind of explains, okay, these are the 4 ways to create a powerful moment. And from those powerful moments, this is how you can create it for yourself. And then this is how you can create it for others.
So that like attention to other people is kind of what hooked you in a little bit. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so I learned about this book because I am exploring kind of a different career path. And I realized that onboarding is really important for employers. And a lot of employers don't actually have onboarding programs. And so I was chatting with a girlfriend and I was saying, I just really want to have a process that brings people in, that creates this defining moment for them and makes them feel special. And she's like, Jess, you need to read this book.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's actually one of the examples they talk about, right? Yeah,
exactly. So that's what that hooked me, right? Like I was, everybody always thinks that they have this great, insightful thought. You're like, oh yeah, onboarding. It's something that needs to happen. And somebody else thought of it, right? But they do such a great job explaining it.
Yeah.
Exactly as to like why, like their example was John Deere because they had like the retention, right? So it was, they were noticing that employees were kind of falling off the grid pretty quickly. And they started realizing, oh, we should have a better onboarding program that made somebody feel like they're a part of this amazing family. It takes you forever to get a job. So why wouldn't you like feel like you're part of the family once you get there? So this experience just, tenfold. They got like employee retention was so much higher.
Right. I think with onboarding and specifically, I hear more stories of when it doesn't happen, like at all. And people are like, I showed up and I was like, hello? Like, what do I do? Like, oh, I'm supposed to do what now? Like, okay, like, where do I find, and which obviously sets up not a really powerful moment for people, unlike this book and the power of like creating those moments. And I think I would also agree with you. A part of this book that was interesting to me is I facilitate a lot of educational experiences and they can be really boring, right? You can be like, oh, and then I sat in a class and then blah, blah, blah. But I'm about experiential education. So creating experiences that you learn from and grow from.
Yes.
And this is just such an interesting overlay of like, we think about like content, like, oh, here's the piece of information I need to get across or whatever it is. But the power of the experience itself is what this really addressed. And like how to create that experience that is, meaningful and powerful for people while they're learning, while they're onboarding, while they're doing, to support sort of this other piece of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why some of this spoke to me. But maybe we should get into these, the 4 elements of, defining moments, right? So Chip and Dan Heath, by the way, are brothers. I don't know if you know much about them, but they've written a couple of other really interesting, fascinating books. I'm a fan of them. And so not that really is super relevant, but if you like this book, I would recommend any of their other books. They don't write a ton. They've written like 4 or 5. It's not like the Heath brothers library of 7,000 books, but they're pretty great. But anyways, back to defining moments. They say there has to have 1 or more of these 4 elements make a moment like a short experience that's memorable and meaningful. So it has either elevation, insight, pride, or connection. And so those are like the 4 big pieces. And then they go into a ton of detail about how to create each of those, how to use each of those elements in a defining moment. Each of them have sub elements, and it gets like, it's very well organized, but there's like a lot of depth. It's not like a pamphlet. But of those, were there any of those that kind of stood out to you as like, oh, that defining moment really speaks to me? Or that's one I want to do or want to be more thoughtful around, or I've experienced?
That's a great question. There are, a lot of them, every single one of them, there was at least an example that I could say to myself, that moment. Let's see here. I'm trying to think. In terms of my favorite, so definitely the insight tripping over the truth was kind of interesting. So that was the whole sanitation story of, oh goodness. Do you remember where the location was? Where the study took place? It was in India, I believe,
I don't remember.
Maybe it was Bangladesh. So just kind of like that whole sanitation project of that there was a lot of, they brought in a lot of latrines.
Right? Oh, right. Okay, yeah,
that one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember where, story.
Yeah.
The poop story. That's the way they remember it. In terms of, they had educators come in, and what they found was the sanitation. It was just the location. Everybody was kind of pooping, for a better word, everywhere else, and that was kind of going into their food supply. They brought in latrines, but nobody was actually using them. And what they did was they realized that they had to educate the community to kind of trip over the truth, to realize that by them pooping in the fields, it was actually going into their food source. And they were like, oh my goodness, we didn't realize that. So that just kind of that power of your own insight of like educating somebody else to realize the truth was very powerful. Like you can go ahead and a teacher can provide all the tools necessary for education, but unless that student is fully engaged and kind of understanding what's going on, like to your point of like experiencing, making an experiential process, and they have this like aha moment, right?
Yeah.
One of those is that I came up with. I've heard this example. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a professor that's in a class, and he kind of says, "Here's a jar. Here are all my rocks, my pebbles, and my sand. And kind of, I want you to go ahead and put all of these rocks, pebbles, and sand, can they fit in this jar?" Right? And he starts putting everything in, and it doesn't actually close. But yet he then prioritizes and says, okay, let's actually put the rocks in first, then the pebbles, and then the sand. And, the sand kind of shifts in between. So it then closes. So this kind of like this aha moment of like, how do you like also prioritize your workload is important as well. So
sure.
That's one of them. I mean, how about you? What stood out for you?
I like insight too, for sure. That's a great one. And the note from the Heath brothers is that the people in the audience have to discover the truth for themselves. Like, you're like, here's this truth, here's this amazing true thing. And they're like, okay, great, that's a true thing. But they're like, oh my gosh, this is a true thing. Like they have to like discover it personally. And that makes the need for action obvious then after that. Yes. So they're like, oh, this is like, oh, yeah. And so I think this is kind of classically what we think of as like a powerful moment. It's like, it happens lightning fast. You're just like, your brain explodes and then everything's amazing after that. But I like the idea that, like you're learning, but it's also like it's not easy. If it was obvious, we'd all already know it, right? So there's like some gap or some stretch we're making to kind of get this piece of insight. And then once we have it, we like the classic, like you've been stretched so you can't like kind of return to your normal shape because your brain has like expanded or, whatever.
And they talk about that with mentors, right? That's an example that they provide with stretching for insight. They kind of were saying that mentors kind of, what they do for us is they expose the mentee to risk, right? So they put us kind of in an unnatural, uncomfortable position, which to your point on the stretching for insight, right? They say, this is their line. They said, research suggests that reflecting or ruminating on our thoughts and feelings is an ineffective way to achieve the truth. the true understandings. Studying our own behavior is more fruitful. So then, what I thought about there was, I don't know if you're into journaling or bullet journaling, but journaling to me is one of the most difficult and most painful things in the world.
I'm not really a journaler, to be honest.
Yeah, it's so hard. But I'll say this, what it allows you to do is it allows you to reflect and then stretch for that insight, right? It kind of allows you to kind of see where your intention should go and where that truth should lie. So that was
right. Yeah. I think and it is like really, like that stretch isn't like, I'm stretching and so it's a success, but the stretching is about learning, and then that learning is where you like apply that self-insight comes from that learning.
Yes.
So then that's where whatever the promise of that comes to fruition is in the learning that you provide for yourself. I also liked one of the other 4 big chunks was moments of elevation, which I feel like I mean, maybe I've spent a lot of time outdoors, so I feel like there's a lot of these moments of elevation because they can be very sensory. Like if you go to a new place, like this is why people go to waterfalls, right? And go on hikes to like peaks and hill, like this is why hiking happens a lot of times for many of the casual hikers in our world, because you get to some place and suddenly you're like, whoa, everything here is really like the sun brighter here? The air is different. The waterfall is falling, whatever. And so people have this huge, like very engaged, very intense, like sensory experience is one type of a moment of elevation. So I feel like that's one that I think people have more often than they maybe appreciate. Or on the flip side, some people seek that out through specifically hiking is like the way I see people like pursuing sort of moments of elevation out there.
Yeah. And to that, the other one that I really liked was he calls it break the script. So kind of like a surprise and delight. So one of the examples that popped into my head when I read it was one of the last companies I worked for, the e-com director would do this surprise and delight piece, which meant that within our customers, whoever purchased our product would get a quote unquote surprise and delight in the package. So you would open your box thinking you're getting, you're getting this product, you're excited. And then in the box is like, another knife I work for a knife company. So,
sure.
or something that basically the customer didn't know they were getting, right?
Right.
So that in itself is like exciting. Like they had it called, their example was like the popsicle hotline.
Oh,
which,
sure.
Where people went to this kind of like ratty hotel.
Yeah,
but
I know, it doesn't sound that great. It's just weird. It sounds like a weird place, but yet I really want to go. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but like the fact that you could there's this like a red telephone. Of course, the first thing I thought of was like Batman, right?
Yeah.
So you can like pick up this hotline and they would bring you any kind of popsicle you wanted. And this waiter would come up, and he would serve you your popsicle on this like dish and just made it like super fancy. And apparently the hotel got like 5 stars, but like you look at it and it's special, right? It's
like objectively like a 2-star hotel.
Yes.
But yet the ratings are through the roof because of the popsicle hotline. Yeah, that was hilarious. Yeah, I loved it. I was once at in line at a restaurant at like to order, and the person ahead of me in line made their order, and they're like, "Oh, hey, we've seen you come in here a lot. Your order is free today." And the guy's like, "What?" I just happened to be the next person in line after this guy, or whatever, and he was just like so overjoyed, like obviously a huge moment of elevation for him. And I remember just watching it. I remember seeing it happen, and it wasn't like, "Oh, why did that happen to me?" It was more like, "Oh, that's so cool." Even though like I would have loved my burrito to be free, but it wasn't that day. But it was such a really like memorable, and this speaks to the power of moments, right? I remember that moment.
Yes.
Like we remember these moments, and the moment of basically the guy turning around to walk out and the smile on his face,
and how happy he was, right?
Yeah.
Like I had.
And it was like he just had like a normal order. It wasn't like he ordered anything special. Like he just did his, Yeah.
I had something similar when I was in Connecticut, and I would go to this one coffee spot all the time. And it was like, and what was challenging about the spot was parking, right? It was Connecticut has a lot of one-way roads, at least downtown. And I just couldn't find a spot. And so I was stuck in traffic and I knew I couldn't park. And here comes my barista running outside with my order. Like,
yeah.
and she saw me and and I was like, it just made my day. And I think that is like, to your point, is like, you remember these moments that all it took was one person to make your day. And then you are also going to remember that moment and you're going to hopefully give that back or, paying it forward. And so that's the kind of like, I see this as like the premise of this book, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you're learning more about yourself, but you're also giving back to others by understanding these 4 principles.
Yeah. And that seems like another great example of that, like, moment of elevation. Like, it's unexpected. It broke the script. Like, I'm sure it sounds like a place that doesn't do delivery. That wasn't how they operated, but they literally saw you, knew what was happening, like, ran it out to you. Like, totally broke the expectations around how that normally goes. So one of the other examples is moments of pride.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, do you have thoughts around that? Too. Okay, yeah, tell me what your thoughts on this.
Well, I like it because, like, so they talk about that, you capture pride by like recognizing or earning recognition, showing courage, right? And this one just touches a lot, or hits home, I should say, with me, especially kind of recognition. So one of the things I took about it was taking the moment to reflect, whether it's on a weekly basis or even monthly basis, to realize who in your life is very important, that has given you meaning, and allowing them to realize this as well. So one of my best friends, I've known her for going on, I think 10, 12 years now. We were living together, and then her boyfriend ended up moving into the apartment that I was in. And then they ended up getting a house about 2 months ago. This was really hard for me because, we'd been so close, and now she was leaving me, and I was like, who's going to take care of my cat? And so, so she went on, and I just thought, this is going to be my moment to write her a letter to thank her for everything that she's given me in this time period. And so recognizing her as a friend also gave her a moment, but also made me realize how much I valued her. So that was one part of it. The other was the practicing courage part, which they talk about a lot. And Brene Brown, of course, she's like a hot topic. Everybody knows Brene Brown, but her aspect of like vulnerability and courage is very big, and leaning into courage by being vulnerable, that they go hand in hand. And so when Chip and Dan like wrote this example, the practicing courage, the first thing that for me that came into mind was Toastmasters, right? The practice of, delivering speeches or presentations in front of audiences is something like the number one fear.
Yeah, right. People fear that more than death, I think I've heard. And
it's
public speaking. Yeah, right.
So just that kind of hit home, that you really do have to practice courage.
Yeah.
So,
that's great. I think the other part that sticks out to me from this chapter is sort of, moments of pride are often milestones, and they mention like multiplying milestones. Like, it's not just like one thing. Like, how can you like level up that milestone? It's not just like, well, you've been here. I worked for an organization that had, you got recognized at, for all these different milestones, and different branches recognize different milestones differently a little bit. Like, one that was like, this is your 3rd year. Oh my gosh, we can't believe it's your 3rd year. And another place, it's like, yeah, well, let us know when it's your 20th year, okay? Because like everyone's here for, like more people stuck around, whatever it was. It was just very interesting. But I think I like this idea of like that milestones, they can be recognized as bigger goals, or you can sort of add pieces to them to elevate them. And knowing that they're milestones to achieve kind of sets you up for this like moment of pride in the future. Yes. Like, oh, I can't wait till I'm, being recognized for my 3rd year, my 5th, whatever it is, those kind of things. And I think those, that helps you keep track of progress, blah, blah, blah. but how to elevate these milestones so the moments of recognition are moments of pride, not just like, oh yeah, I survived, like, okay, yes. I guess I haven't gotten fired yet. That's the milestone. So I think it just kind of made me more thoughtful around how some of the organizations I've been a part of it's just very much attached to time. Like, well, you've been here this many days, this many, or years, this many, things. But and I think sometimes that it's like the ceremony and how that is shared and created that really elevates that moment versus like, oh yeah, I'm going to send you a certificate in the mail. Like, who cares? Like it's like not maybe as big a deal. And recognition is different for different people for sure. And not everyone wants to give a speech and, all these other things. But I think there's, the thought of how to multiply those milestones to even make them even like a more impactful moment. This just kind of came to mind as part of this chapter.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, I think about, they give the example of this guy that went from couch to 5K. That was their example. Like, he hated running type of deal and then kind of started on this program. But that kind of also goes back to documenting and watching your progress, right?
Yeah,
so one thing I've noticed on this, like for myself currently, is visualization is very important for me. So seeing what I've accomplished, even though I may feel like I didn't accomplish anything, is important, right?
Yeah.
So like, you look back on your week and sometimes you think like, I didn't do anything. And then say, if you were to write everything down, you're like, actually I did this. I did the podcast. I did,
accomplishment. Amazing. Yeah.
Done. And so then you get, for sure. You get that, you have those milestones and you get a sense of pride with, in that you actually did do something, right?
Right.
So
another argument for journaling.
I know.
Or just looking at your calendar. I mean, I feel like I would do a lot on my calendar, and that's how I keep track of my life in a lot of ways. But it is, worth looking back to be like, oh, look at all these things I did last week, or
Yes.
It is sometimes there's a lot on there. Sometimes not quite as much, but not quite everything makes the calendar. Yeah, but that's true. So that's the. Moments of pride. And then sort of the last of the big four pieces is moments of connection.
Yes.
And this is about connection and shared meaning being created a lot of times. And what are your thoughts on this?
This one's a good one. This one's also, because I think again about companies, and they brought up this as well in terms of, if you're in it together, then it is more meaningful, right? So if you have if you have a company that is providing you purpose, then everybody's on that same playing field, understanding the goal that you actually need to obtain the objective versus just passion. They had a study in there which I really found interesting, based off of, because you hear this a lot, Iggy. Like, I'm hearing it a lot. It's like, what is your purpose in life? What is your why, right? And you hear a lot of people say, follow your passions. But this was a really good example of how passion is a part of it. It's actually the purpose. It's the purpose that brings everybody together. Passion is, and Angela Duckworth talks about this in terms of grit, that passions are developed. Right. So throughout our lives, what we were passionate about when we were younger versus what we're passionate about now is very, very different.
Right.
And so our journeys are different. But if what we're striving for, our purpose, our why, is kind of our true north, then our passions will kind of like follow and surround it. And so their example was very good in terms of, having you're all in it together, right? You have a purposeful struggle and you're united and you're with each other. And it's like a hip, hip, hurrah. Okay. Right. I just see this like Braveheart,
Right. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it?
I think I have spent a lot of time taking groups into the outdoors and traveling in a way that it becomes very obvious that they need each other, right? Like physically to carry the stuff, or everyone needs to get there together. We can't just like leave people behind, especially if you're on a canoeing expedition. You can't just like dump your other buddy out of the boat and just like expect to be as efficient or effective often. And so, but those connections are really like everyone is there together physically in ways that are very obvious. But I think there's that other layer of like establishing that sense of purpose, and that sense of purpose, like, oh wait, like you can't just physically all be together and have that sense of moment of connection. You actually have to be united in purpose, and like the passion, I think also kind of goes up and down over, as if you're really facing a challenge, there's going to be low moments, right? Where you're like, why am I doing that? People ask the question why, or why they're even here. But that bigger purpose like carries you through those lower moments, I think. Yeah. And I think all of that really does create the shared meaning. Like it takes investment to create shared meaning with other people. You can't, if you were just literally in the same room together, you're not going to have shared meaning necessarily. I've seen plenty of sort of very traditional classroom. Everyone sits at their desk and their row, their table, whatever. Like there's no shared meaning. Everyone's on their own little island there versus a much more interactive or experiential environment where people have to not just interact with each other, but like rely on each other and like have a sense of need and purpose for connecting with each other. Mm-hmm. Then there's a huge amount of shared meaning is created. And those moments are so much more powerful because that is the moment of connection, because you're creating that shared meaning together versus, well, I think, not that everyone agrees or, you're all on the same page. That's not really a part of it, but that you feel that sense that you're in it together versus like we just happen to be in the same place at the same time. Like we're in the same place in traffic with a lot of people at the same time. There's no shared meaning there. Like it's,
But there's an example that talks about this. So you're absolutely right in that like there's no shared meaning when we're all like, say, in the same country, in the same state. However, they've shown this where, and I've had this happen too. You go to a different country and nobody speaks English. And then all of a sudden you hear somebody speak English and you're like, oh my goodness, where are you from? Right? Yeah. Please. And then all of a sudden, to your point, there's a connection, right? Yeah. Because you're put in a different environment that enables, that kind of shakes it up.
Yeah. I think that, and you have suddenly like a really strong connection with this random person. I remember traveling abroad and the person they didn't just speak English, but they had a very much an American accent, like, and I would say like a Southern Californian accent. I'm like, I want to talk, and I was traveling like alone. It was like late at night. It's been a long day. I'm really tired. And this young woman was like, blah, blah, blah. I was like, I just want to hang out and talk to you because like, this is like not only are you easy to talk to because, my Spanish then was not very good. And, but that she spoke American English and not, like another, accent to English. So I was like, oh, I feel even more connected to you now, or I feel like, and I remember again, like this is like the memory I have of that moment, meeting that person in that hostel at, in that place in that time because of that shared connection. That moment stuck with me for sure.
Yes. It's really, really powerful. I mean, there's a lot of those moments that you think about, like airplanes, when you get stuck, all of a sudden you start chatting with somebody, you're going to just remember that moment for a really long time. So the struggle is real. And I also think about, it in terms of, this is why support groups are really needed, right? Support groups are needed because you're all in it together. So for example, I lost my job a year ago and I realized that yes, I can have my friends. Yes, I can have my family going ahead and being supportive, but they don't quite understand what I'm going through, right? The people that understand what I'm going through are the people and the friends and the girlfriends that are in it with me, that we can just talk about it on a monthly basis and say, well, where are you? What are you doing? What are your struggles? What are your peak elevation moments that happened? What are, your prideful moments? So basically everything that they said, kind of like from the elevation to the insight to the pride, can be brought up into connection and talked about. So.
Yeah, that's great. I facilitate mastermind groups, which for that very purpose, I think they add like learning and growth, but that sense of connection is really what masterminds hit that I think a lot of other things don't. Like I also facilitate like a class, and in a class I might be a webinar. The people are there, they see each other in a little box on the screen. They maybe hear each other chat, it's fine. But like a mastermind group where the purpose, part of the purpose is to facilitate that sense of connection. It's a much different experience and a much more powerful level of connection in a different way because of that. Yeah, because that connection is fostered through the experience. Speaking of those types of things, application of these ideas. So this where this book came around. I'm like, oh, moments of connection. Like, how do I then facilitate masterminds to support even more connection and to really build that into the process of this group that's going to meet over time? Because again, you can meet with people over time and have very little connection, or you can set the stage, create the environment that connection is fostered and built up, that for that moment of connection to elevate that moment for that mastermind group, for sure. Are there other ways you see yourself using the ideas from this book, or applying them, or want to apply them?
Yeah. I mean, I've given a few examples, right? I think for me, it's more of taking them into the workplace. So things that so as I was reading through, I was like, okay, that made sense. That makes sense. I'm going to try to do this, as well as, like I said earlier, within myself. So, and creating these moments for myself, whether it's the moments of courage, being a better public speaker by doing Toastmasters, and or giving moments of pride and recognition to my friends and family, and letting them know that I value them and I am very grateful for them, and doing that in whatever way I can, whether it's making cupcakes or writing a letter, letting them know of specific moments that they helped me throughout my life.
Fantastic.
But,
that's so great. Yeah. I don't know if you saw this in your copy of the book, but they actually have like a website. There's a website attached to every book, and there's like a little thing for like how to get more moments. Like basically how to build more of these into your life. And they have like a little, I don't even know what to call it, like a little exercise, like a little do yourself, like, oh, you want more powerful moments in your life? Here's like a little plan to go through and try these different things and see how they work and do whatever. So I'm sure, I don't remember the website. I'm sure you can Google it, Power of Moments, Chip and Dan Heath, find their website. And there's like a little, like how to apply this to your life part that it was, I tried, it was pretty fun. I think I did the sort of earlier version when they were just developing it. It was just fun. And it like sort of, prompts you to think about different things, or prompts you to engage it with people. Like, who can you show recognition to? Like, think of, a time, have a conversation with them. Who, like, where do you see connection happening? Where do you see these different pieces happening in your life? And sort of it actualizes it for yourself. But I think you're right. The next level then is like, how do I actualize this for other people? How do I create powerful moments? Not just in like, oh yeah, I'm going to facilitate a mastermind and like be thoughtful about connection, but how do I give people recognition? How do I create those moments of pride for people, or those other, how do I elevate this moment just so that it's memorable for people? And not every moment needs to be like so memorable and amazing, but how do I like strategically, makes it sound kind of like manipulative, but how do I bring these moments of elevation, these moments of insight into what I'm doing so that it does have a more impact. And I think it just makes people feel good, right? Like not in a way to like, how do I, use everyone for my, evil purposes, but how do I bring this sense of, powerful moments to people around me? I think that's, one of the cooler parts of this book. And I think it's, for me, an ongoing practice, but I think super interesting and fun to think about how to bring joy to other people.
It's basically it's thought-provoking, right? It's getting yourself out of your own comfort zone. And I always think about, gratitude, volunteering. It's one of those, the pieces of you're learning more about yourself through the act of giving and helping others, right? So you're learning more about yourself, and it's kind of like a win-win. I keep hearing this term, win-win scenario, right? And that win-win is you're giving them, basically the endorphins are rushing through yourself and them, and the oxytocin is flowing, the connections are moving, and it doesn't make sense not to do these things, I guess, is the way that I see it.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy, and all you have to do is, you could literally go through each one and say, I'm going to do one of these things for the, for the month. And that's it. Like, it doesn't have to be complicated, right?
Right.
I think that a lot of times it can be overwhelming, kind of to our point of like journaling. And I started doing the bullet journaling and just taking out a blank canvas. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do? You know?
Yeah. Well, there's more books on that we'll, I'm sure, talk about another time. But yeah, I think the beauty of this book is how to apply it for yourself and for other people, for sure.
Yes.
So it's been, it was great. It was a fun read. And I would say like a pretty snappy read, like collectively reading it moved right along. There's interesting stories. I feel like every section had like an interesting example or interesting story or like really, the hotel or the, whatever, and the trains, all kinds of stuff.
The other part of it that they added, which I've not really seen before in a book, is they tie everything in and kind of give an example of how these pieces can be applied, right? So they give a real world example and say, okay, this is a situation. How can you solve for it? By applying these principles. And I thought that was very fascinating because that's when your mind starts actually thinking a little bit more like, okay, I can apply elevation in this situation by doing this. I can apply pride. I can apply insight. I can apply connection to this scenario, right? So just thinking outside the box is basically they're giving you a little bit of a like homework assignment that's already filled in for you. Right.
Well, it's definitely supported. It's not. They give you a lot of ideas or steps for, how to make progress along those things for sure. Yeah, I think I did enjoy that too, that this book is structured itself for applying the ideas in the book. It's not just like read this and throw it on the bookshelf. It's like read this and then it's very set up to apply it to your life or, to yourself or to people around you. Yeah. And so that's, I always appreciate that transference idea. Like the book wants you to apply it. We want you to apply it. Everyone wants you to go create these like moments of impact for other people.
Yes. Impacts for other people and yourself. Yeah. I think that's a big one, right? So, but it was, you're right. It was a fun book. I enjoyed reading it. I actually ended up also listening it on audio because I was curious to know what kind of learner I was, if I was more of a visual or auditory. So it took me a little bit longer, but that was a fun little experiment.
Yeah. Was the audio good? I only read the physical
audio is good. I definitely noticed that, when I read, I skip over words and sometimes change over the meaning of things. So when I was listening to it, I was like, oh, that's what that meant.
Oh, that's great. That's very funny. That's funny. Well, Jess, it's been great talking with you about this book today. Thanks so much for having this conversation. Very lively, fun conversation. And thanks for being here and taking part in the podcast today.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been great.
For sure. Have an awesome afternoon. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Books Applied podcast. I hope you enjoyed getting to know a new book and learning how to apply its ideas to make your work, sport, or life a little bit more awesome. For more leadership education-related content, including conflict management checklists, invitations to a fun free lunch that happens monthly, upcoming classes, webinars, and mastermind groups, please head over to wslleadership.com. Thanks, and have a great day.